The veil fell from her head at the altar, and the prince froze when he saw it wasn't his bride's face. The bells did not so much ring as tremble through stone and breath, a great bronze pulse that set the incense drifting in slow tides beneath the vaulted ribs. The nave of the cathedral gleamed with candlelight thrown up against gilded carvings and pale saints. Silk spoke in the small sounds of 1,000 careful movements. The city had pressed itself into pews and aisles, layered lace and velvet and expectation. Heat gathered beneath veils. In that heat, a pin loosened. She felt it before she knew it. The faint change and weight at the crown of her head. The whisper of silk dragging a fraction across hair. A tremor at her temple that told her the veil had lifted away from skin and now hung on hope and habit. Do not move, someone had told her before dawn. Stand like a figure carved from alabaster. Nod when you must. Keep your eyes low. She had intended to obey because obedience had always been safety, but the weight was sliding, and the officiant's voice was lifting into the familiar Latin that would bind two names. The air smelled of beeswax and orange peel crushed beneath shoes in the plaza. A thought passed across her mind as quick as a swallow. If it fell, it would fall now. It fell. The silver hairpin spun out from the lace like a thrown coin and struck marble with a sound that cut the priest's cadence in two. The veil followed, a soft collapse, and slid from her head in a sweep that exposed her cheek, her brow, the curve of a mouth that had learned to hide its words. The crowd inhaled, as if the church itself had been dunked into the river. "Consent," the officiant began, then stopped. His hand held in the air in a blessing that no longer knew where to land. She did not lift the veil. It had left her of its own will. She stood beneath the altar's gold, skin prickled by sudden air, and the man beside her, he who had learned to be a prince before he had learned to be himself, looked at her for the first time without the filter of lace. His eyes did not move at first. They seemed to fix on the line where her hair had pressed into a neat ring from the hours of wait. Then they found the silver on the floor. Then they rose to her face. The 3 points of a triangle that, once drawn, could not be erased. In the hush that followed, small movements sounded like thunder. A chair leg scraped. A bead rolled beneath a pew. Somewhere in the transept, a fan shut with a quick bite. The usher nearest her drew a step forward, then stopped at a gesture from the front pews. Somewhere in the sea of faces, a smile tightened into something else entirely. A child, hoisted on a father's shoulder, peered as if at a festival trick. "Who is she?" whispered a voice that wanted to be scandalized and hungry at once. She knew what they saw. Not the heir to a house, not the chosen face for treaties and maps and cordialities. They saw a girl whose hands were too fine-boned to have known idleness and too steady to have known indulgence, a posture learned under watchful eyes, a neck bare of the heavy jewels that signaled safety in this world. They saw the fragile illusions of a morning that promised pageantry, and found instead a question. The officiant lowered his hand. His gaze flickered to the prince, to the front pew, to the fall of lace pooling at her shoes. The Latin would wait for orders. The prince moved. Not extravagantly. His gesture was small, meant for the officiant, and those whose job it was to move others. But it carried authority threaded into his body by a lifetime of ceremonies. He lifted 2 fingers. The officiant stepped back. The acolytes hovered, their linen sleeves trembling over their wrists. "Highness!" came a voice from the choir rail, pitched low and oil-smooth. He did not answer. He stepped down 1 step from his place and bent to the floor. His hand closed around the silver hairpin. Her breath pulled shallow and hot. The hairpin was a swallow in flight, wings opened, beak tilted. A trinket, no, or a token that meant something in places where she was never invited. His fingers held it as if it might instruct him. He straightened. His gaze met hers again for a heartbeat that stretched thin enough to feel like pain. In his eyes, she saw not disgust. She had prepared for that, but calculation and something too quick to have a name. A flicker that marked, in the ledger of his mind, a line that did not match any entry he had expected. "Hold," he said. Just the one word, in a voice that carried like a bell through fog. The officiant froze. The congregation did what people do in an emergency. They looked for the nearest authority, the nearest escape, the nearest folly. A murmur rose toward the arched ceiling and broke into 100 small currents. Some faces turned to the front pew, where a woman sat with a fan balanced in her fingers as if it were a blade she knew how to use. She did not look at the girl. She looked at the men who would decide how much of this was error and how much of this could be solved by force. The girl felt the heat creep along the back of her neck. The lace lay at her feet like a skin shed. She did not crouch to reclaim it. Her hands stayed precisely where she had been taught to keep them when she carried hot pots and pride across kitchens. She was not the woman they had been promised. She was the woman they had made use of. A page appeared at the west door, breathless, and paused at a signal from the verger. There was a rhythm here, even in chaos. It belonged to those who knew how to direct bodies and light and sound in great spaces. The prince turned his head a fraction. It was enough. Guards moved without noise to form a loose cordon. The front pews were approached by ushers with fixed smiles and nervous eyes. The officiant drew back to the altar, lips moving as if to keep prayers from drying out mid-word. "Your Highness," the officiant said, voice pitched for the step where they stood. "There are procedures." "Exactly," he answered. He used no title for himself and offered none to the girl. It was not unkindness. It was precision. "We will follow them." He slid the silver hairpin into the interior fold of his sash. Small, hidden, accounted for. She had never been that close to him before. She had seen him in parades, the sun flashing on harness and polished wood. She had seen him carried through crowds like a promise or a threat. Up close, the effect of such a man was different. He smelled like soap, horse, the faint mineral of a fountain. He seemed not larger, but denser, the way a tightly woven cloth holds more weight than one loosely made. "Come," the officiant said, breathing relief as he discovered a path that looked like duty and no longer like choice. "Into the sacristy." She glanced once toward the nave. The doors at the end were still open to the square, and the sound of street sellers, muffled by stone, drifted in as if the world were refusing to accept that this room contained its mourning. The prince caught the glance and nodded to a guard. The great valves began to move. The sound of the cathedral doors closing was a thing in itself. It came in slow thunder, a long boom that ran its hand down the spine. The air seemed to shift towards stillness. Outside and inside became two different countries. Ushers stepped forward to separate people with gentle authority. The girl was guided, not roughly, toward the door that led into the sacristy, the room where vestments hung like upright clouds and cabinets smelled of cedar and old paper. The prince went after her, the officiant between them, as if they were tethered by the order of events and not by anything more human. The sacristy was cooler. The stone there seemed to remember night longer than the nave. Cabinet doors gleamed. A table held a missal open to the place where their mourning had broken. A priest she did not know, older and patient-faced, lifted his eyes and then lowered them again to whatever duty kept his hands steady. "Witnesses," someone said. "Those nearest the altar. Those who saw." People filtered in with customary reluctance to be singled out. A young woman who had been closest to the front crossed herself so many times her fingers blurred. An elderly nobleman adjusted his cuffs to prove his steadiness and perhaps to hide his trembling. A clerk with ink-stained fingers clutched his notebook. "Names," the officiant said, ready to impose order like a salve. "We will have names and accounts." She answered when spoken to. She gave the name she had been given. She let it fall into the room as if it might change shape once it left her mouth. It did not. The syllables lay flat on the table, and the clerk bent over them and captured them in his book. "And yours," the officiant said to the prince, as if it mattered for the record, and the theatre both. "You know mine," he replied, and a line of amusement tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was not laughter, it was acknowledgement. Even now, he could find a thread of humor, the kind that keeps a person upright. Outside the sacristy door, a small swarm of ushers and guards sorted the congregation. Those with something to say were placed in carved stalls where a priest could find them in due time. Those with nothing more to offer than appetite were shown the way to the courtyard with a courtesy that hid irritation. The matriarch from the front pew stood her ground in the nave longer than protocol required. No one asked her to leave. When she finally stepped toward the sacristy, the air went taut as wire. "Madam," the officiant said, dipping the kind of bow that avoids war without sacrificing dignity. She tipped her fan in acknowledgement and moved to a place where she could see everything and betray nothing. In the smaller room, the prince turned from the girl to the men who would define the next hour with their decisions. His face had the particular stillness of someone who has mastered his own expression so often that even the smallest loss of control would feel like exposure. "There will be talk of impediments," said the older priest in the room, voice soft enough to be kind and firm enough to be law. "Of consent, of identity. The church requires clarity before vows can be exchanged." The prince inclined his head. "Then we will give the church clarity." The girl felt the gratitude and the brace at once. He spoke as if he could conjure clarity by willing it. He might do so, she thought, in most rooms. In this room, clarity would cut through her life in a way no knife had done. The older priest glanced at her. "Do you know why you are here?" She held his gaze. The answer the room wanted was simple. The answer her life offered was complicated. She chose something between them. To stand where someone else was meant to stand. "And to speak now," he said gently. "Without fear." "Without fear" was a phrase that had never belonged to her. She set it aside like a jewel that looked fine from a distance and cut your finger up close. Pages came and went with whispers. Paper rustled with the sound of power changing hands without raising its voice. The prince took one pace left, one pace right, as if measuring the distance between duty and impulse and finding that the length now was shorter than yesterday. He slid a thumb along the hairpin through the cloth, the tiny pressure betraying his awareness of the thing like a talisman. The officiant composed himself to declare a pause in the ceremony. He looked as if he wished to rewind the morning to a place where it would lie down and obey. He could not do it. He could only name what had occurred and propose a path. "The rite has been interrupted," he said, turning to face both the priest and the secular authority represented by livery in the doorway. "We will adjourn under church protocol. We will examine the facts." "And until then?" the matriarch asked, making the question a lance with a single phrase. "Until then," the officiant replied, "the woman will be under my protection," the prince said, not raising his voice, not looking at the matriarch, looking at the room, and the law wider than it. "Pending examination." A murmur went through the sacristy like wind through leaves. It was not quite disapproval. It was not endorsement. It was the sound people make when they know a line has been drawn and are curious to see who crosses it. "Highness," the older priest began. "Protection," the prince repeated, and for the first time since the veil fell, something sparked beneath the surface of his control. Not possession, not claim. Protection. The word landed. It settled on her shoulders warm as a shawl and heavy as iron. It meant she would not be pulled from the room by servants of a house that had used her well and owned her not at all. It meant she would be contained in a new way. She was not sure which frightened her more. The officiant breathed out. "Very well. She will not be removed." The matriarch's fan flicked twice, then held steady. Somewhere in the doorway, a guard shifted weight. The clerk bent more fiercely over his book, as if writing fast enough would keep the world from unraveling. Pages darted, one toward the west door, another toward a side chapel where witnesses waited with stories burning their tongues. The air scraped along her throat, dry as chalk. She felt the need for water, as if it were a prayer. Voices rose outside the sacristy. Not angry exactly, urgent. The prince lifted his head. The door opened for a breathless boy carrying a heavy tube of leather sealed with a gob of red wax stamped deep and clear. "A decree," he said, as if the word itself might absolve him of bringing its weight into the room. "From the civil governor." The sacristy gathered itself for a new kind of storm. "Bring it," the prince said. The boy crossed the room with his eyes on the floor. He held out the leather. The seal caught the candlelight and shone darker than blood. The officiant looked at the older priest. The older priest looked at the prince. The prince nodded. The wax broke with a faint crack. The strip of paper inside unfurled, and the clerk stepped forward to receive it, and then deferred to the man whose job it was to read such things into rooms. A herald, summoned from the nave by some chain of signals as old as the stone itself, appeared in the doorway, his livery formal and a little damp with sweat. "Read," the prince said. The herald took the parchment with both hands. He looked to the officiant, then to the matriarch, then to the girl. He lifted the decree so that candlelight bathed it, and the letters shone as if the city had conspired to make them visible to all. The doors of the cathedral, which had begun to drift toward standing ajar to let in the morning's heat, were pushed to again. Their deep boom rolled down the nave, shook into the sacristy, and settled like a drumbeat at the base of the spine. The world outside would have to wait. A bead of wax, fallen from a candle beside the missal, crawled in a slow tear down to the table. The girl watched it, as if her fate were held in that small, molten path. The prince's hand loosened over the hairpin beneath his sash, then stilled. The herald took a breath and the room leaned into it. "By order of the civil governor, should the nuptials fail to proceed this day, the woman presented at the altar is to be removed at once to civil custody, her person placed beyond any household's protection." Silence pressed in on the words as if the parchment itself had stolen the breath from the room. A bead of wax tipped off the candle and hardened at once on the missal's leather. The prince did not blink. "By whose hand?" he asked. "The governor's," the herald said, steadied now by the business of reading. "Sealed and witnessed." The older priest, calm, precise, lifted his chin. "Church law governs vows and consent. Until it is clear that vows cannot proceed, the person in question is under ecclesiastical care. The order names civil custody," the matriarch said. "The state will not be mocked with delays." The officiant held his breath. The clerk's quill scratched, eager and afraid. The prince took a step into the space between altar law and city decree. "We will do neither mockery nor haste. The ceremony is paused under proper rule. The woman does not leave the church's keeping until a church jurist has examined her consent and identity." "Tonight," the matriarch said, each consonant sharpened. "By nightfall," the older priest agreed. "The jurist is summoned. The church will answer to the governor with clarity." The herald looked down, relieved to have his portion done. He folded the decree and waited with the posture of a man who does not wish to be part of any argument that reaches beyond his pay. The prince turned to the guards. "Escort her to the Alcazar," he said. "Not to a jail, to a room in the women's wing. She will be watched. She will not be removed." "Highness," the officiant began, as if to offer some incense of formality to the rawness of the moment. He shook his head once. "We will not drag this spectacle through the streets." A small nod passed between him and the older priest that was less agreement than a treaty. The decision found its channels. Ushers began to usher for real. Those with titles were steered to the south transept to be thanked and dismissed. Those with news were sorted into a side chapel to be questioned later. The matriarch held her place until the last possible moment, then turned in a rustle of silk and left a wake of whispers in her path. The girl stood without reaching for her veil. The prince caught her eye because he could not help it. He had commanded men on parade and watched them spill into formation with the precision of habit. This was not that. This was a single person inside a great machine that wanted to grind and would, if allowed. He kept his voice level. "You will walk with my guard," he said. "No one touches you." Her mouth moved as if to answer, then settled. He could not read what had been withheld: assent, defiance, or the human wish to speak in one's own defense before it was too late. They went out into the nave together, and the cathedral doors opened with a groan that sounded like a wound. Daylight rolled in, laid a hand on faces that tried not to flinch. The square's noise washed up to the threshold and faltered there, uncertain whether this was still a festival. "Clear the route," the captain of the guard said, and men in livery moved as if they were part of the building, as if stone had grown arms. The prince watched the girl step beneath the painted saints. She did not stumble. He felt an odd, unhelpful pride at that. It made nothing easier, and yet it refused to be dismissed. As they crossed into the heat, the city rearranged itself around them. Vendors muttered prayers. A boy on a barrel tried to see and got cuffed for it. Ladies raised fans as if they could hide scandal by stirring air. The prince's counselor appeared from some shadow he had been using to think. "This will be undone by midnight if we do not act," the counselor murmured. "Signal composure, command a salon, give the city a picture of order." "And give you a vantage from which to count the men who smell advantage," the prince said. "If you prefer the phrase," the counselor answered, with the ghost of a bow. He did not prefer it. He preferred truth. He gave the order anyway. They crossed the palace threshold, and cool reached up from the tiles like water. The girl blinked because her eyes had learned the heat. The corridor's shadow made quiet things audible again. The scrape of a shoe, the soft clash of a ring against a door latch, a woman's breath. The prince stopped at the door to the women's quarters and spoke to the attendant. "Prepare a chamber that can be shut and watched. Bring a lady of a reputable house to serve as chaperone. Send for a scribe. Send to the confessor of the Valverde household. Send to the jeweler who supplies their women. Send to my council and the church jurist." The attendant bowed with the speed that comes when a man understands that the smallest delays now are remembered later. "And send to the kitchens," the prince added, thinking of the wax tear crawling down the missile. Water, food, salt. He did not look at the girl when he said it. He wanted the kindness to be invisible. He walked on, his counselor at his shoulder, the measure of a day remade in his head. He would hold a salon before evening. He would put the city in one room. He would watch how information traveled from fan to fan, glance to glance. He would weigh which men aligned with law and which with ease. He would instruct his hands to do all of this while his mind kept reaching back toward a veiled line in an open church that had suddenly become a face. He did not touch the hairpin in his sash. He knew where it was, as surely as he knew where his heart sat inside his ribs. The sun moved. Shadows on the courtyard tiles stretched into new shapes, as if they too were suspicious of the day. He went to prepare the evening the way a general prepares ground, with respect for forces he could not fully control. And beneath it all, still and inconvenient, he felt the heat of a desire that had nothing to do with lust and everything to do with the fierce wish to protect what had been thrust into danger in his sight. He did not give it language. Language would only make it harder to hide. The chamber smelled of soap and dried lavender. A clean dress lay on the bed, simple and well-made, the kind of thing that would erase edges without pretending to be what it was not. A woman of middle years sat in a chair near the window, hands folded neatly over a rosary. She nodded when the girl entered. It was not unkind. It was the practiced greeting of women who have spent a lifetime being entrusted with other people's mess. "You will have water," the chaperone said, "and bread, if you can keep it." "I can keep it," the girl answered. In truth, the knowledge that a decree had named her removable property had left her light-headed, a little adrift. She eased onto the bench by the window and let the air, cooler here than in the church, steady her. Outside, in the palace garden, the leaves shivered with a breeze she could not feel. An attendant brought water, and she drank, swallowing against the way her throat tried to guard itself. Bread followed, and salt. She ate slowly because hunger had taught her that gulping belonged to animals in desperation. A knock on the door brought a scribe in with his book, and 2 guards who kept their eyes on a fixed point somewhere above the chaperone's head. The scribe bowed and opened to a clean page. His pen hovered. "Your name," he said. She gave it. She looked at his hand and saw the ink stain at the side of his finger where it had become a part of him. He listened with that particular intensity of people whose job is to catch and bind sound into sense. He asked where she had been born, where she had lived. He asked, with a professional sorrow, how she had come to be dressed in a bridal gown for a prince. She considered the distance between her throat and the truth, and found that her words could cross it without breaking. "I was brought," she said. "I was told it would protect a woman who could not protect herself." "Told by whom?" he asked. She glanced at the chaperone, then back at him. "By those whose voices were always expected to be obeyed." The pen stopped for half a second. The scribe wrote the sentence slowly, as if to prevent it from escaping. "What did you understand would happen? That I would stand in a place, still and quiet, that it would be fixed before it mattered, that no one would ever see my face." He wrote that too, the words small and stubborn on the page. The guards did not move. She wondered what they were thinking, these men whose jobs were built on certainty. Perhaps they, too, were learning that in palaces, as in alleys, women were asked to offer their bodies to hold up other people's agreements. A second knock. A priest stepped in, the same older man from the sacristy, face lined in ways that spoke of listening more than pronouncing. He inclined his head. "I must ask you the questions the church requires," he said. "For your sake, not only for law." She nodded. He asked about consent, about force, about promises made to her and by her. He kept his tone even, a kind of kindness that let the questions be sharp without slicing. "I did not consent to be wed," she said. "I consented to stand." "Did you intend to say yes when asked for vows?" She paused and felt the weight of her own answer before she set it down. "No." He did not nod, but something in his shoulders eased. He spoke a blessing that did not presume to fix anything, and withdrew. The scribe closed his book. The guard stepped back. The chaperone reached for the cup and refilled it with a steady hand. She turned her palm and looked at the small marks where the veil's weight had pressed. They faded into her skin as she studied them, as if erasure were always waiting for its chance. A servant came, eyes lowered, to collect the dress she had arrived in. Another brought in a shawl. The room felt part cell, part sanctuary. In the courtyard below, a gardener brushed a broom along the path beneath the orange trees, flicking dust into small golden storms that died in the shade. A clock tolled from somewhere within the palace, and the sound gathered the day toward the afternoon. A page slipped inside carrying a small square parcel wrapped in cloth. It was placed on the table, and the page departed with the speed of someone sent to run messages that must not be seen to linger. The chaperone unfolded the cloth. Inside lay the silver hairpin. It shone slyly under the light that had caught it. Along the inner curve, where only fingers would feel, an engraving traced a delicate mark she could not read, but could sense in the way it balanced weight. "Evidence," the chaperone said, just above a whisper, "for those who know the emblems of houses." "And do you?" the girl asked. The chaperone met her gaze. "I've served in rooms where such things have meanings. I have learned to pretend I do not see." The door opened, and the older priest stepped back in, summoned by the same logic that brought the pin. His eyes fell on the metal, and for the first time that day, he lost a little color. He crossed himself, not because it was evil, but because recognition sometimes demands a prayer. "What is it?" the girl asked. "A bird," he said softly, "that flies between private rooms." "It has wings," she said. "It looks like it is going somewhere." "Yes," he said. and I suspect it has been doing so for some time. He did not touch it. He stepped away and murmured to the scribe in the hall. The pin was wrapped again and taken to a place where it could be locked and later displayed, as much a witness as any human being. The day moved toward ceremony again, but a different kind, the palace's answer to panic. Servants laid a walkway with clean rushes to keep dust down. Musicians tuned. A table with refreshments was set under the arcade with a sort of stubborn cheerfulness. Invitations were not sent because invitations were not needed. Rumor did the work of ink. Near dusk, the chaperone led the girl through a short passage to a walled garden just beyond the salon. 2 guards took their positions at either end of the narrow path. She was permitted to walk between a stone bench and a potted lemon, and no further. From there, the room could see her without touching her. She breathed air that smelled of bitter rind and watered earth. Through the open doors, the salon filled with men and women who had dressed again after undressing from the morning. Lace softened edges, jewels preened. Laughter was careful and came in short bursts. The prince entered without flourish and received bows like a man receiving hail, as something one endures. He stood beneath a painting of kings at a hunt and watched the way people aligned under pressure. Fans spoke. He had learned to read the language, though it felt like eavesdropping on a code that had been invented to keep him out. A flick outward like a wing, a sharp close like a snapped jaw, a slow, soft wave that meant pity or poison depending on the hand. His counselor moved at the edges of the room, taking the temperature like a physician with a hand at a wrist. The older priest stood near a column, speaking to the scribe, and then not speaking, because sometimes silence keeps evidence safer than talk. Across the threshold of the salon, the garden held its own small weather. The girl sat, rose, sat again, aware of eyes on her the way one is aware of a patch of sun on one's cheek. A woman of a certain age approached the doorway to look, head tilted, expression thoughtful in the way of people who have rearranged their judgments 3 times today and are not sure which order to keep. A young man glanced and then ignited with a friend into a noise that tried to be indifferent and failed. The prince noted who dared to look and who pretended not to, the nobility of both moves depending on intent. He also noted, against his will, the shape of the girl's shoulders when she breathed, the way the shawl lifted and fell as if it were keeping time with a clock inside his chest. He crossed to the doorway and paused at the threshold. He did not enter the garden. The guard inclined his head. Question and refusal mingled in one angle. The prince respected it. "You are well?" he asked, pitched for the space. "I have water," she said, "and air." The reply could have been gratitude, or a tally of minimums. He accepted it as both. He wanted to say that air and water were more than some had been given on such days, that he knew it and would not pretend otherwise. He said nothing. There is a kind of honesty that is only cruelty under such roofs. Music began, a measured piece that required the body to step where it wished and where others would not be offended. A couple made an attempt on the polished floor. Boots whispered. He let the dance be, knowing it had been deployed on purpose, not for joy, but for the message that all remained in place. He turned to the older priest who had drifted nearer. "A jurist, by nightfall?" "He is on the road," the priest said, "with documents and patience." "Good. And you will need both." "I have them," he said, as if saying it would make it true. If he stood long enough at the threshold, someone would make a scene. He moved back into the room. A noblewoman's fan broke into a staccato of bladed flicks, sharp, precise, instructive. Across from her, a young man turned and left the salon through a side door that led to the service halls. Orders traveled on currents. The prince felt the shift, the way a sailor feels a change in the wind without needing to see the sail. He caught his counselor's eye. The man nodded once. He had seen it too. "Keep the doors watched," the prince said to a guard he trusted, especially the small ones. The guard bowed and crossed the room with the invisibility of men whose job depends on being mistaken for furniture. The girl in the garden lifted her face to the night's first hint of cool. A bat flickered overhead. Somewhere in the building, A bell rang the hour, and the day that had begun with a fall of lace slid with a soft click toward evening. A footman, flushed with haste, appeared at the far side of the salon and spoke to the counselor. The counselor's face did not change, which told the prince more than a shout. He went to them. "Say it," he told the footman. "The intended bride," the footman whispered. "Her household cannot account for her. She is not in her rooms. She is not in the chapel. She is not—" "Enough," the counselor said softly. He looked at the prince. "The city does not need the word missing. It needs the word unaccounted for. It is smaller." "It is not smaller to those who care," the prince said. "No," the counselor agreed, "but they already know." A quiet fell inside him that had nothing to do with the music. The room kept its shape. People kept their smiles as if they had been pinned to their faces with jewels. The older priest approached, pulled by the gravity of bad news. "We will proceed all the same," he said, as if courage were an object that could be placed on a table and shared. "Proceed to what?" the matriarch asked, having arrived at the edge of the conversation without anyone noticing how. "To truth," the priest said. "To survival," the counselor murmured. The matriarch's fan made that small, deadly flick again. The prince followed the line of it to the door where the young man had disappeared. He felt the slope beneath his feet steepen. The counselor drew a folded paper from his sleeve. "There is a legal path," he said. "If the woman in the garden cannot prove noble birth or lawful consent, the alliance can be salvaged by declaring her a fraud, by placing her in civil custody, and proceeding with a new arrangement when the proper bride is found." The prince turned his head slowly and looked at the counselor, until the man had the good sense to look away. "You will not repeat that, where ears are hungry." "I will repeat it where it matters," the counselor replied, "to prepare for what dawn might require." The word dawn set the room's clocks moving again in his head. Time was no longer the smooth span of daylight. It was a series of doors that would shut whether he reached them or not. In the garden, the girl stood and shifted the shawl, aware of the way attention had tightened around her without a sound. She did not know why, not yet. She knew only that the night had lost a degree of confidence. 2 heralds entered at once, which should never happen. The first carried a letter sealed in blue, the mark of municipal business. The second bore red, the governor's color again, and his face had the pallor of a man who has been asked to move faster than his age prefers. The prince lifted a hand. One at a time. The blue seal first. The herald read that the city officers would cooperate with the church, and that order would be maintained around the cathedral at first light. Sensible words, delivered with the stiffness of a man who had been practicing them while climbing stairs. "Now the red," the counselor said, because he had to. The red seal broke. The herald's voice, though trained to carry, thinned with the strain of it. "By order of the civil governor, should the person under church custody fail to demonstrate her identity and lawful consent by dawn, she will be seized for fraud and imprisoned until further judgment." The garden doors slammed in a sudden gust, and the night seemed to take one step closer. The word imprisoned hung in the salon like a knife above a table, too bright to ignore, too crude to be anything but real. The prince watched the red seal fold back upon itself, watched the herald lower his eyes, and felt, for one breath, the old temptation to fix things by force. It passed. Force here would only make larger prints in soft earth. "The church will answer by dawn," the older priest said. "Until then, she is under our care." "Your care," the matriarch replied, the fan resting flat now in a declaration that she had moved beyond coded talk. "And yet you ask for the palace to keep her guarded. Curious how guardianship travels where it is useful." The prince touched no one and nothing. He kept his hands at his sides and let his voice hold the room still. "She will not be removed. Not by you. Not by anyone. Not until the jurist has questioned her and recorded her answers." "You assume she has answers," the matriarch said. "I assume she has a voice," he returned, "which is more than she was given this morning." A ripple moved through the assembled, as if someone had tugged a thread, and the whole fabric had remembered what it was made of. It was not approval, it was attention. His counselor stepped close, tone pitched to slip past ears. Strength is not only protection, Highness. It is measurement. See who approaches now that danger has been named. I am seeing, the prince said. He did see. He saw a young lord edge away from the matriarch's orbit as if to test new gravity. He saw a pair of women whisper over the rim of a goblet with faces that suggested pity converted to calculation. He heard, as if from another room, a laugh shaped into the new rumor. The lace-maker princess. The phrase had the cruelty of a children's rhyme. It would spread by dawn and be used to cut. Contain that, he told the counselor. With what? The man asked. Song? Decree? Threat? Respect, he said. If you can remember the flavor. The counselor's mouth quirked in something that would have been amusement on a gentler day. I will try. A footman materialized, pale with the urgency of small disasters. He held out a folded scrap of paper and did not meet the prince's eyes. From the service corridor, he said, left where your highness would find it. There is no place where I would find it by accident, the prince said. He took the note with a distaste he did not bother to hide. On the paper, a hand had written in a cramped, careful script. She asked her price and took it. Send her where buyers go. The words smelled of lie and ink and cowardice. He read them twice and felt anger fire up through his ribs and then cool into something worse. Doubt, the kind he despised most because it pretended to be prudence. Who put this in your hand? He asked. I did not see, the footman said, meaning he had seen and had learned to say he had not in order to keep his position. A man passed it through the door, a sleeve, a ring that caught the light. That is all. The counselor leaned close to read. His exhale barely moved the hair at his temple. It begins, he said. It will not take, the prince said. The words came stubborn and late. Then do not let it, the counselor said. But understand what it is meant to do first. He did. He understood a planted story when he saw one. He had, after all, been raised in rooms where men planted them like vines and then acted surprised when they grew to cover anything inconvenient. Still, he folded the paper and placed it inside his coat. Odd that he could not bring himself to crumple it. The very shape of it in his pocket felt like a betrayal, not of fact, but of a benefit of the doubt he wanted to give and had not yet earned. The older priest drifted nearer as if the note had pulled him. Highness? You are bound, the prince said. I know, and yet. And yet there are records that do not require me to break any seal, the priest said, voice quiet, steady. In that household, ledgers exist. Receipts, payments, commissions. Names that do not lie as easily as people do. Where? Where stewards lock them, he said, within reach of hands that are not invited during the day. The entry for a certain jeweler will be written in ink that has not faded, I suspect. It will mention a bird. He did not look toward the garden where the girl sat between lemon and stone. He had the discipline not to. Neither did the prince. The very discipline felt like a touch held just short of contact. The matriarch's fan snapped once, an impatient tack. We are to be threatened by books now. Pages are for those who can afford to dress their sins in words. Then you will be comfortable, the counselor murmured. She did not pretend not to hear. Remove her, she said to the prince, the pleas omitted because she had never learned the taste of it. Now, before this farce grows legs. You may save your breath, the prince said. It will be needed later. He felt the room lean, as a boat leans. He adjusted without thinking. He had learned to keep his balance on other people's tilting decks. Keep a close watch on the kitchens, he told a guard, because the thought had come like a spark. On the stables, on any door a man with a hat brim low could use. Yes, Highness. He stayed at the salon threshold, only long enough to fix the map of the room in his mind. Then he moved down the gallery, like a man carrying a tray filled to the brim. The urge to look into the garden passed through him again and went unanswered. To look would be to admit to something this house would devour with relish. He turned instead toward the women's wing to give orders he had already given and to hear reports he already knew he would hate. They moved her from the garden with the quiet efficiency of people instructed to be kind while being watched. The chaperone reclaimed her with a small nod that felt like a hand around the wrist in deep water. The corridor was cooler than the salon, and the hush there seemed honest where the hush in the room of music had been rehearsed. "Come," the chaperone said. "You will be tired from sitting." It is not a comfort people expect, but it becomes one when choice is removed. The girl walked beside her, measuring steps because being measured had never kept her safe, and yet habits do not evaporate when a door shuts. She had heard the phrase, "lace-maker princess," from mouths that thought themselves discreet. The soft little laugh pressed into it like a hairpin into a knot. It was not surprise that stung. It was the ease with which people found a way to make her an object for games they called wit. In the chamber, the air smelled of the lemon leaves she had brushed earlier. The shawl retained the garden, a ghost of damp earth and evening. She sat on the bench by the window and watched the light thin. In the courtyard, a servant shook a rug and beat dust out of it until a golden cloud rose and settled back on stone. A knock, and the older priest stood at the threshold, hat in hand, as if he were seeking permission to enter a house not his own. He looked at the chaperone, then at the girl. His mouth folded into a line of humility and urgency braided together. "I am constrained," he said, stepping inside when the chaperone nodded. "I will not ask you to carry the weight of anyone's private words. I will tell you what exists in daylight. The ledger of that house, names of those paid, times, places, the receipt of a jeweler for a piece shaped like a bird with open wings." "A swallow," she said, before she could help it. The word had come the way certain songs come, uncalled and complete. "Yes," he said, and the simplicity of the agreement made something ache. "There are also payments to a woman who was present at births. Not all births in a house appear on family trees. Some are pruned. The stubs remain in ledgers. Stubs are sometimes all God leaves us." The chaperone's hands tightened on her rosary. The girl felt the ledger before she touched it, the way one feels the weight of a tool when it is named. She nodded because nodding was the only movement that would not require stumbling into gratitude or pleading. "Where?" she asked. "In the steward's rooms," he said, "near the riverside. He counts money where he can hear the traffic of goods. He believes himself practical. Sometimes practicality is a map to truth." "What do I do with truth?" she asked, and then wished she had not, because it sounded like asking for a blessing. "You live with it," he said gently. "That is all any of us can do. You need not decide more tonight." A guard's voice in the corridor kept its respectful distance. The older priest bowed to the chaperone and withdrew. The girl stood on legs that felt newly borrowed. She felt in her bones the hours between now and dawn. They were shorter than she needed and longer than she could bear. The chaperone watched her and made a choice. "You cannot undo what has been done to you," she said, "but I have eyes. If you chose to walk down the corridor to the small door that is often left unbarred for deliveries, I would not know, because I do not see everything. I am a woman with limited gifts." "Those gifts have saved lives," the girl said. "Today I hope they save yours." The chaperone turned to the window and took a sudden interest in the sky's very precise colors. The girl moved silently. She knew the rhythm of guards who did not wish to intimidate. Their feet made a gentler sound. She knew the places where servants had worn stone thinner with centuries of duty. The postern by the wine deliveries breathed cool air like a secret. It was unlatched, carelessness with the face of mercy. The corridor yielded to a narrow yard. The yard yielded to a street that bent toward the river as all streets in this part of the city did, like tributaries returning to their parent. The night lifted its damp hand and placed it on her shoulder. She did not shake it off. She let it make her a smudge among other smudges. The Guadalquivir lay wide and dark, its surface a skin that shivered with each boat moving in its sleep. Lanterns swung along the bank in little gold arcs. Voices pooled in corners where men had something to sell that could not be sold in daylight. The floating bridge, the Puente de Barcas, creaked as carts rolled and slowed, rolled and slowed. Every plank knew the weight of the day and complained about it. She moved along the water with the knowledge that the river gives witnesses and erases them in the same breath. The Valverde house faced one of the narrower lanes, its facade clean of gossip. The laundry door had always been less secure because water came and went there with the regularity of breath. Tonight, the latch caught, then gave. Inside, the house smelled of damp cloth and old heat. The sound she listened for, voices, did not come. Silence in a house is not neutral. It says the owners are elsewhere or attempting to be absent from their own lives. She kept low, not because of fear, but because low was the angle from which she had learned rooms. The steward's office would be near money and the river. She found it by following the logic of men who loved their own comfort. The desk placed where a breeze could be felt. The strongbox kept far enough from the window to feel safe and close enough to check without standing. Keys were gone. This mattered less than the nature of ledgers. Ledgers are not hidden like jewels. They are consulted. They live in plain sight to pretend innocence. She found the book by looking for wear, finger smudges along the edge, the binding flexed where figures had been tallied. She lit no candle. She opened the cover and let memory read where eyes could not. Pages carry a scent when they are handled often. It is the smell of oil and dust and decision. Her fingers found the place where the paper felt newer, and she turned there, trusting touch. Ink gloamed in the thin light from a high window. Names formed out of the murk, the jeweler of Triana. The word swallow written with a flourish that made it seem to fly. Amounts that would mean little to anyone but that house and everything to her. Below, entries to a woman whose services were assessed discreetly and in cash. The dates did not align with the family's celebrations. They aligned with nights when windows had been shuttered and the household hushed, as if sleep were an illness that could be caught. She closed the ledger against the urge to read more. She had not come to learn a story. She had come to carry proof of one. The book was heavier than it looked. She pressed it under her shawl, flat against her ribs, and felt the edges with her breath. She returned the way she had come, past linen that smelled like women's work, laundry lines that had seen more truth than ballrooms ever would. The lane received her with the indifference of stone. The river made a low sound, the voice of something large choosing to be patient. A step that was not hers struck behind her. Then another. The sound was small because the men who made it wished to erase it and had practiced. She did not turn her head. That is how you tell men you have heard them. She walked as if unafraid, which is not the same as being unafraid. The river drew her as cover and witnessed both. The planks of the Puente de Barcas took her weight and moved under it. Lanterns on the barge moorings swung and made small circles on the wooden floor. She kept to the middle, where a hand would have to reach farther to catch her. It was a mistake, but a logical one. The middle looks neutral and is, in fact, exposure. A figure stepped from a shadow broader than it should have been. A hat brim killed the lantern's light, broke it into a ring around his face that told her nothing. Another shape rose from the other side like a thought appearing in a mind one hoped had been emptied. The ledger pressed into her ribs. The hairpin in her palm. She had taken it without knowing she had taken it, a weight that refused to be left, caught on the shawl and slid. Metal kissed wood. "Easy," a voice said. "This is not for you." "Nothing has ever been for me," she replied, and did not recognize her own voice when it came back to her over water. It had grown bones in a day. Hands. Not gentle, a grab for the book. She turned into the grip and let her body be smaller than it felt, an old trick that makes a hand miss. The ledger skidded along the shawl and fell to the plank, with a sound that should have been loud enough to alert saints. It was not. The river eats sounds and returns them wrong. She kicked. It did not free her. It only made the man holding her adjust his grip to something more effective. The other shape stooped and snatched the book with the hunger of a dog denied scraps too long. She surged against the hold and reached for the ledger. Fingers touched cardboard, slipped. The hairpin slipped free, spun, and lay with its wings splayed upon wet wood, looking for all the world as if it might lift. "Enough," the first man said. His breath smelled like anise and money. "We are not cruel." "You are not creative either," she said, "because useless defiance sometimes keeps a person from falling apart." A whistle rose from the bank, thin and practical. It was a signal. The men moved in answer to it, one backing away with the ledger tucked inside his coat, the other half carrying, half dragging her toward the quayside, where the moorings would hide them and people minding their own business would continue to do so for pay or fear. She twisted, found purchase, failed to keep it. A lantern swung and threw the Swallow into a sudden brightness that cut her heart, and then went. She caught a breath like a promise and could not keep that either. They disappeared into the hollow under the bank that smelled of rope and damp iron. The plank where she had been rocked as if to remember her. The hairpin lay as if waiting to be claimed by a hand that would keep its word. "Highness," the guard said, appearing at the edge of the salon, the way bad news always learns to find its way in. A woman was seen running toward the river. Men followed, the bridge. The prince did not excuse himself, because there is no etiquette for that kind of sentence. He was already moving, the counselor at his side, the older priest a pace behind, until the rhythm of the palace pulled him elsewhere. The night reached up at them like weeds in water. He did not feel the ground until the courtyard door opened and cool found his face. The palace gave way to city with that seam he knew so well, a line of tile that became stone, paved order becoming patched compromise. The guard ahead cut through pockets of conversation that stiffened when uniforms entered them. He took corners as if they were opportunities to gain time back from hours already spent poorly. The river met them with its unhurried certainty. Lights made nerves along its surface. The bridge shifted, complained. He stepped onto the first plank and felt the give that has made brave men cautious, and cautious men brave by necessity. He heard somewhere the sound of a whistle, then the echo of air flapping in a place where no cloth flew. "There," the guard said, pointing with his chin because pointing with fingers marks a man as green. A glint on the plank's edge. Small, inconsiderate in its persistence. The prince moved toward it the way one moves toward a thing one does not wish to confirm. The Swallow lay on its side, wings shining, as if the river had tried to clean them of whatever this night had painted upon them. He crouched. He put his hand beside it without touching, as if it were living and might startle. "Tracks?" he asked, unnecessary, and hated the way the word sounded like a hunter's. "Dragged," the guard said. "Toward the quay. Witness saw 2 men. Could not see their faces." "And the book?" the counselor asked, every syllable a calculation he could not stop doing even now. "What book?" the guard said, and then, remembering his place, added, "No book." The prince lifted the hairpin between finger and thumb. Water slicked his skin. He felt, in that wet, something like a vow made not with words, but with the contact of metal against pulse. He did not close his hand around it. He did not put it away. He let it hang in the air and catch the lantern light and make a tiny star of its own. The river slid past, unconcerned with men and their deadlines, with weddings and their interruptions, with girls and their courage, with princes and their fear. He looked into the dark under the bank where ropes slept and rats whispered. He listened. The city, which knows when it is being watched, said nothing useful back. Behind him, boots approached at a run. A boy, the kind who learns to be everywhere there is news, panted open-mouthed. "They took her," he said, and the words punched holes into the night. 2. They took her into the yard by the shipwrights, and then someone whistled and they went the other way. Fast, like men who knew when to stop being brave. Where? The prince asked, but the boy's pointing hand sketched only shadow. He stood. He felt the plank move under him and knew, with the kind of certainty that leaves no room for grace, that his next steps would not be fast enough to catch the last ones taken here, and that what the river had left him was all it meant to give. A small silver swallow, and the cold space where her weight had been. Torches flared along the quay, as if the river had teeth that needed light to keep them from closing. The prince moved with the tide of his men, not ahead, not behind, the way a man who intends to control outcomes learns to look like he is merely following the nature of things. The silver swallow lay cold in his palm, small as a promise and heavy as a debt. "Fans out to the shipwright's yard," he said. "2 to the granary sheds. No noise unless you must. The quarter will help if we do not insult it." He did not look at the counselor because he knew what the man's face would say. Control is not lost until you show it. He did not look at the older priest because he knew what that face would say too. Control is illusion. Duty is the thing that keeps you from drowning in it. A man stepped from the dark with his hands open at the shoulder, as if showing he carried nothing but worry. "There," he said, jerking his chin toward a crooked lane between a cooper's shop and a warehouse that few honest men would admit to owning. A girl was hauled that way. Someone whistled. They changed course and cut under. "Your name," the prince said. "Matteo," he answered, not humble and not false. "Dockside." The name tightened something inside the prince he did not have time to understand. "You saw her," the prince said. "I saw them," Matteo corrected. "I heard her. She did not beg." The prince's mouth moved before he had planned it. "No," he said. "She would not." They went at a run that tried not to look like a run. The planks of the path along the river gave under weight, and water knocked against stone as if impatient. The smell of pitch and tar thickened near the shipwright's yard, and the night thinned, not with light, but with attention. People stopped pretending to have nothing to do with other people's business. Faces turned, assessed, decided to help or to wait. "Here," Matteo said, catching at a shattered pallet and lifting it as if it were little more than a pulled thread. Behind it, a short door, newer wood in an old frame. He pressed his ear against it. 2 breaths, he said. 1 steady, 1. He did not finish. He slid the bar up with the skill of a man who had learned to rely on his hands. The prince nodded to his guard. The door opened with bad temper and old oil. Inside, air that had lost a fight with damp. Coils of rope stacked like sleeping snakes. A lantern turned down to a point of light that was more determination than flame. She was there, wedged between barrels and rope, chin lifted as if she had chosen her own small battlefield. A bruise darkening along the arm, already purpling into a map of what others had decided for her. Her eyes found the prince and made the tightness in his chest both easier and worse. "You are late," she said, and the corner of her mouth threatened something that could have been courage disguised as mockery. "I am here," he said. Matteo moved to block the door with his body, not trusting wood or law. "You are the one from the church," he said, measuring the prince with a look that had nothing to do with deference. "If you mean her harm, I will be sand in your teeth." "I have enough sand in my teeth," the prince said, "from places you would not want to walk. I will not add this to it." "Good," Matteo said. He adjusted his stance, not moving aside, but allowing reality. These men had uniforms and orders. He had an instinct and a brother's kind of spine. "What did they take?" the prince asked, voice a notch lower, turned toward the girl without making the question a demand. She shifted and winced, annoyed by her own body's insistence on feeling. "A book," she said. "A ledger. It proves more than I can in words that would be discounted." "Where did you find it?" he asked. "In the steward's office on the riverside of their house," she said. "Because money lives near water. Because paper accumulates where men pretend it has no meaning. Practical, he said, and let admiration sit in the tone like the back of a hand on a fevered brow. She looked at his hand, not because he moved it, but because she remembered where the hairpin should be. He opened his fingers. The silver swallow lay against his skin. For a second, he thought it would lift under its own will. He stepped close enough to feel the heat of her breath and placed it in her palm as carefully as a man would pass a cup containing something that could burn. "I kept what was never mine," he said. "I am returning it." Her fingers closed over it as if she were saving more than metal. "You kept it so it would not be used to claw me," she said. "Sometimes theft is stewardship." Matteo exhaled, a sound like relief that refused to admit itself. "You will take her out of here," he said to the prince. "You will place her where men who write decrees cannot bend doors." "The Alcazar," the prince said, "under guard, under the eyes of the church, under my protection." "Fine words," Matteo said. "Make them a wall." "They will be a wall," the prince said, and did not say the part he could not guarantee. He had learned young that walls can be scaled by men who are not tired of sinning. The girl shifted again and drew a breath that had a thread of stubbornness in it. "If the book is gone," she said, "the ink is not. It exists in other hands. A jeweler will remember the shape of what he made. A woman who helps bring babies into the world will remember where she laid her hands. People pretend to forget. Their bodies do not. We will find them," the prince said. "Together." He did not reach out to her because touch in these quarters can be misread and abusively remembered. He nodded to Matteo instead. "You know this maze." "I know enough," Matteo said. "And I know the men who whistle when courage fails." The ledger likely went not to a pocket, but to a desk where a man believes furniture transforms theft into accounting. "Valverde's river office," the prince said. Matteo's mouth twitched. "You speak as if you have stood in such rooms." "I have," the prince said. "More often than I admit." The guards made space for them with their bodies without making noise. They learned it from the river, which knows how to move unannounced. Outside, night had shifted closer to morning, not by light, but by the feel of hours gathering into the shape of consequences. "Bring her," the prince told his men. "Not as a bundle, as a witness. She walks." Matteo went ahead. The girl followed with her jaw set, the swallow hidden in her hand. The prince matched her pace without trying to. He made the decision on the walk, the way a man makes decisions when the path does not offer places to sit. He would place his title in the basin and wash it if this house tried to use it to drown her. If Leonore refused to speak truth, he would petition to pull the alliance apart. The thought did not feel like rebellion, it felt like repair. The strong smell of paper greeted her before she saw the room, the way a kitchen tells you what is cooking from the yard. Catalina stepped into the steward's office and felt the shape of men's attention settle around her like the sweep of a cape. The steward stood behind his desk with his chin up as if posture could make him a wall. He was a narrow man with a narrow bookkeeper's pride, and in his eyes was the particular contempt for anyone who arrives without heraldry and expects to be seen. "Open the cabinet," the prince said. "This is a private office," the steward answered. He did not look at Catalina. He looked at the guards and saw uniforms, not men. "You have no right. The right you fear most is not mine," the prince said, with a patience that managed to be more pointed than impatience would have been. "It is the church's and the dawn's." "Keys," Matteo said, as if asking for salt. The word had a weight in his mouth that made the steward look up with a start. "Or shall we make them jump out?" The prince could have ordered the cabinet broken. He could have claimed any number of powers. He did not. He took one small step aside and allowed the older priest, who had arrived in the wake of the guards, to fill the doorway with his gentle authority. "We will not harm your furniture," the priest said. "We will not damage your locks. We will open them with your consent to prevent the need for worse. You may tell your household you cooperated with the church. When this is done, you may go on counting, if that is what your soul chooses for itself." The steward set his jaw. He looked at the prince's face and saw no give. He looked at the priest's face and saw no appetite for petty victory. He looked at Catalina and failed to see what others had done in her, breathing, and mistook it for weakness. He fumbled in a drawer and produced keys. The cabinet opened with a sound like a small sigh. Ledgers sat in neat ranks like drilled soldiers. The steward reached to select one that would say nothing useful. "No," the prince said, "not what you prepare. What is prepared already." Catalina let her fingertips hover and did not touch. She knew the smell of the one she had held. Books keep the imprint of fear and haste as surely as hands do. She nodded toward the middle shelf. "There." A guard lifted it down and set it on the desk. The steward reached again, and then stopped when the prince's eyes flicked to his sleeve. A small movement that had the impact of a hand on a chest. The older priest opened the ledger as if it were a thing that might bite, and found the place by the stiffer paper and the smaller handwriting of payments not meant to be seen by later readers. Figures, names, the jeweler's mark. The word swallow written with the same flourish she had felt under her fingers. Payments to a woman whose name had been replaced by a title, midwife. Dates that held steady even as the steward's breath shortened. "This will be taken," the priest said. "Recorded, returned. Everything recorded and returned is a mercy compared to what is deserved." The steward swallowed whatever words had been gathering and let fear choose silence for him. Matteo watched with a fierce satisfaction that had been earned over years of being lied to. "A runner to the convent," the prince said. "There is a sister there who once was a midwife. She will be called to stand at dawn." "Such women do not leave their orders easily," the counselor said, having materialized with the inevitability of advice. "And yet if asked by a prince and a priest—" "They will come," the older priest said. "Not for us. For what is owed to a child from a night years ago." Catalina's hands wanted to shake, and would not, because they had learned other habits. She stood with the ledger between them all, and felt the shape of a story press out of it, as if the book were breathing. She did not look at the steward. She looked at the page, and saw the cost of other people's choices lined in ink that could not be scrubbed. When they turned to leave, the steward found words that sounded like a man trying to reclaim ownership after his house has been measured by strangers. "You do not know what you are doing," he said. "I am learning," the prince replied. "And I will continue to." The Alcazar received them as if nothing unusual had happened. Lamps burning with dutiful calm, guards at their posts, the quiet humming of a palace that knows it is being watched. The counselor peeled away to send the runner to the convent and to arrange the benches with the brisk cheer of a man who finds comfort in furniture. Catalina walked the corridor with the ledger in the arms of a guard and the chaperone emerging from her door, hair a little disordered as if she had been praying or pretending to sleep. The older priest nodded to both women with the respect that refuses to condescend. Then the air shifted. It does that in palaces when certain people enter a space. A scent of orris and cold stone came with the silk. Doña Leonor stepped from a shadow into the corridor with the same inevitability with which an unkind memory steps into a conversation. Her fan was closed, which in her hands meant weapons were no longer concealed. "You," she said to Catalina, without honorifics and without doubt that the word would find its mark. "You are your father's sin." Catalina felt the statement land in her chest, like something hard and round, tossed by a careless hand. She waited to see if it would bruise. It would. She made a point of looking at the prince before she replied, not for permission, but to fix in herself the sense that she was allowed to answer anyone. "I am not his," she said. "I am mine." Leonor's mouth lifted in a small smile that should not have looked proud. "That will not save you." "It may save the truth," Catalina said, "and what you do with that is your own confession." The older priest stood still, because movement would make the moment either more cruel or less, and either way would be interference. The counselor pretended to discover an urgent need to adjust a sconce. Leonore's gaze shifted to the prince. "You will still marry my house," she said, as if desire and duty were equal and both obedient. "I will do what can be done without lying," he said, "and I will do it in daylight." "That is not how we have survived," she said. "It is how we will begin," he answered. "We will see," she said, which sounded like a promise and a threat threaded together. She turned with a rustle that mocked humility and went away without haste. The corridor breathed again. Catalina's fingers opened and closed once around the hairpin in her palm. The prince saw the motion and felt the relief of having given it back resurface and settle. He discovered that he was not tired, not even after a day that would have wrung strength from stone. He was raw and alert and braced, like a man who hears a storm he cannot outrun and knows his only task is to keep standing. "Food," he said to the chaperone, "and a moment to sit, then we go." "To the cathedral?" the chaperone asked. "To the place where truth is asked to stand," he said. The older priest inclined his head. "The jurist is within the city walls," he said. "I sent a boy with a lantern." "Good," the prince said. He turned to Catalina and stopped at a respectful distance. Space can be a form of kindness when a person has been forced too close to harm. "You will not be alone there." "I have not been alone for a very long time," she said. "Even when no one stood near me." He had no answer that would not betray him. He nodded, which is sometimes the only touch a man can offer without theft. Dawn did not break so much as brighten. The eastern edge of the sky lifted a little, like a tired arm raising itself to show willing. The city was already making the sounds that announce a day, regardless of the dramas of its rulers, the sweep of courtyards, the cough of stoves, the hum of men remembering their bargains. They walked the short distance from palace to cathedral, with steps that made less sound than the hours. Guards set a path. The counselor walked 3 paces behind, a stack of documents in his arms like a tray laden with fragile things. The older priest kept pace, mouth moving in a prayer that asked not for victory, but for the ability to tell the truth without cruelty. Catalina walked beside the prince, the ledger carried before them by a man who did not understand it and did not need to. The swallow lay in her hair where it had been meant to lie and never given the chance. Not as a disguise now, but as a thing acknowledged. She felt its weight and found that she could bear it. The cathedral doors opened to a cool that remembered last night, as if it had been a fever. Benches had been set. A dais had been placed. A small table held wax and ink and sand. Men shifted in their shoes the way men do when they are about to be required to listen. The prince stopped 1 step inside and let the space remember him. He had stood here in a pageant he had interrupted, and now he stood in a hearing he meant to sustain. He did not look at the place where the veil had fallen, because he did not need to. The memory had become a landmark inside him. "Ready?" he asked, the word absurd, necessary and tender in the same breath. Catalina nodded once, and together they crossed the threshold fully, carrying with them a book that did not lie, a pin that did not forget, and a decision that would no longer be delayed. The cathedral held its breath as they crossed the threshold. Benches creaked lightly under shifting weight. Wax glowed in shallow pools. The dais had been set before dawn, as if the stone itself had prepared for a different kind of ceremony. The prince felt the hush reach for his skin and lay there like cool water. He halted 1 pace inside the nave and let his eyes settle on the table where ink, sand, and seal waited. The church jurist stood behind it, gray hair combed flat, expression built for patience. To his right, the older priest inclined his head in welcome that did not pretend ease. The counselor took his place behind them with papers stacked like a small citadel. Leonore sat to the side, fan closed, gaze steady in a way that told him she had not slept or had never needed to. "Highness," the jurist said, "we will begin." "Begin," the prince answered, and heard in his own voice a steadiness he had not expected to find this morning. He turned slightly to see her. Catalina stood half a step to his left, the silver swallow pinned in her hair with a gravity that changed the light on her face. She did not fidget. He had never liked the word poised until he saw it reside in her. The jurist lifted his hand. "We gather to address matters of consent, truth, and the standing of arrangements interrupted. We speak under the Church's care and in the presence of those whose choices are bound to the choices made here. We will hear testimony. We will examine what was written. We will respect the seal that binds certain mouths and ask instead for daylight from pages and witnesses." He signaled to the scribe. The ledger, carried in by a guard, thumped gently onto the table like a heart remembering its job. "From the steward's office," the older priest said. "Brought under observation. Returned when recorded." Leonore's fan tilted a fraction, the only sign that she gave the book a second thought. The jurist opened to the marked pages. Rows of figures looked harmless until the line with the jeweler's name appeared with its neat note. Swallow, silver, 2 pieces. The prince watched the jurist's finger rest on the word and knew, by the small change in his mouth, that he had seen variations of this before. The ledger turned another page, and names surfaced in the older handwriting of a midwife paid discreetly. "Call the jeweler," the jurist said. A man stepped forward from the benches, hat held respectfully low. He had the guarded air of someone accustomed to knowing intimate things about other people's lives without being invited. His hands were clean in the way craftsmen's hands can be, scrubbed, nails trimmed, knuckles carrying white ridges of old cuts. "Your name," the jurist said. He gave it, and the scribe made it permanent in ink. "You supplied a piece in this ledger." "I did," the jeweler said. 2. Swallows. Commissioned for a lady of a great house. The commission was quiet. The instruction precise. Silver only, wings spread. "Can you identify the mark within?" the jurist asked. The jeweler nodded. "Inside the curve. Tiny, not to be seen by any but a caretaker's hand." "An emblem?" the older priest asked, not unkind. "A habit," the jeweler said. "The private kind. Some men carry a sign for sons in public, and another for daughters, in rooms where men do not go." Leonore's eyes lowered half a finger width. The prince saw it and did not look away. "Thank you," the jurist said. "You may sit." The jeweler withdrew, the kind of man who returns to work after assisting at a christening and sees to a clasp without adding to the story he has just held. "Call the steward," the jurist said. The steward approached with the careful outrage of a man who resented being dragged into daylight. He avoided Catalina's eyes as if they burned. "These entries are yours," the jurist said, laying a quiet hand on the page. "They are the houses," the steward answered, and the answer, true and slippery, tasted of limestone and old wine. "You recorded payments to a midwife not aligned to named births," the jurist said. "I recorded what I was told to record," the steward said. "My duty is numbers." The older priest spoke mildly, as a man placing a cloth over something hot. Duty and conscience are not strangers, even when they try to ignore each other. The steward kept his mouth shut for once. The prince decided that was the best they would get from him today. "Call the sister," the jurist said. A door in the side aisle opened. The sister came forward with a step that had no drama in it. It had steadiness. She wore the plainness of her order like armor. Her eyes moved over the room and found Catalina without flinching. "Your name and religion," the jurist said. She gave it. The scribe wrote. The jurist asked the thing that mattered. "You once practiced as a midwife." "I did, until I was called elsewhere," she said. "I do not break seals. I answer what I can for the sake of those who are owed answers." "You attended a birth in the Valverde house," the jurist said. "I attended several," she said. "Some were celebrated with flags and champagne. Some were greeted at night with hot water and silence. I remember all of them. Hands remember. So do ears." "Do you recall the emblem associated with the daughters there?" the older priest asked. "A swallow," she said, slim and swift, carried where it would not be seen and where it would be known. The jurist indicated the ledger. This book names payments that align with your recollection. You confirm you were present to a birth not recorded in public trees. She paused, careful to keep the line the church requires. A child came, she said, in quiet. I was paid in coin that did not rattle when it counted. I returned to see a girl in service who carried herself like someone who has learned to be both watched and unseen. I was not asked to bless her, so I did not, though I prayed. Catalina felt the words settle into her bones with the kindness of a firm hand. She stood still and let the sister's voice build her a small platform that no one could kick out from under her. Your testimony is entered, the jurist said. You may go if you wish to, or you may sit. I will sit, she said simply, and folded herself into a bench as if it were a pew in a parish near the river, as if all days were equal in the eyes of the God she served. The jurist lifted his gaze to the room. We have ledgers and witnesses. We have symbols and silence that speaks. We will hear from the person at the center of this. His eyes shifted to the prince. The prince had known this moment would come, and yet when it arrived, it stood taller than expectation. He stepped forward, and the hush lifted a breath to hear him. I came here yesterday to bind a treaty to a life, he said. The world is built this way more often than not. It is not my place to argue the structure. It is my place to refuse to nail a life to it with deceit. He let the words be plain. Plainness would do more than rhetoric here. A veil fell, he said, not by our will. It showed us what we should have known before we entered. That the person beneath it had not been asked. That we could not proceed without making a mockery of what we ask others to honor when we ask them to call law by its right name. He turned toward Catalina. He did not reach for her hand. He did not need to. I offer what is mine to offer, he said, and the simple statement landed heavier than any oath. I will set aside the treaty if it cannot hold against the truth we have found. I will put my name where it is asked to stand only if she— And here he let his gaze for a moment drop to the swallow and rise again. Only if she chooses it. Not under threat, not for shelter, not because the city watches, because she wishes it. The jurist inclined his head, the unadorned courtesy of a man who has seen much and respects what he wishes he saw more often. The church requires consent for vows, he said. We also require that impediments be cleared. Hidden birth is not an impediment when made truth. Deceit is. It is my office to say that new betrothal may be declared if you both choose it, witnessed and signed and ratified in due time. The crowd will have its murmurs. The law will have its order. The prince bowed, and the bow felt like a release of muscle he had held since the hairpin struck marble. Leonore's fan lifted and fell once. Your words are fine, she said, but you do not consider consequences. Estates, allies, the river's traffic. I consider them, he said, and his voice cooled because fury wants heat, and he would not give her that. I also consider that a house built on this morning's lie will not stand long enough to shelter anyone. Her eyes glittered. It might have been anger. It might have been admiration twisted by habit. You are your mother's son, she said, and the insult failed because the truth in it softened it into something like respect. He returned his attention to the person who mattered. Catalina, he said, and let the name be simple. He watched it enter the space where the city had tethered her with other names. You owe me nothing. You owe them nothing. You owe yourself answer. I am not asking for rescue. I am asking what you will do with what has been put in your hands. He stood where all could see him wait. In this, waiting became the most eloquent thing a man could do. She felt the room turn toward her in a way that, in other seasons, would have been heat, and this morning was wind. The sister's eyes gave her steadiness. The older priest's stillness let her stand inside it a moment, as if it were shelter. She put her palm briefly against the swallow in her hair. and the feel of it, familiar and newly chosen, filled her with courage that did not need to shout. "I was not asked when I was brought to the altar," she said. Her voice did not swell. It simply carried, because truth does its own work. "I was told it would be fixed before it mattered. It was not. It matters. I have worked in rooms where names meant everything until someone needed you silent. I will not be silent where my life is concerned." She turned her face to the jurist. "You ask for consent. Mine is not for sale. It is not a bargaining chip. It is not payment for protection. It is a gift I decide to give or to keep." She looked back to the prince. He held her gaze and did not blink. He had learned to win by not showing need. He had learned to love by not flinching when it asked something of him. "You returned what was never yours," she said. "You put your body between me and men who act like walls. You took my name into a room where men would have preferred a title. I see it. I am not blind." The air between them had shape now. It had warmth too, not the quick heat of spectacle, but the steady kind that thaws what has been cold too long. "I choose," she said, and the two words, delivered without flourish, drew a string through the morning and tightened it until slack disappeared. "I choose you, if you will have me without masks, without treaty, without using my name as tar to seal what is cracked." His breath left him in a way he would later call prayer. He did not move fast. Fast would look like hunger. He moved as if everything depended on doing everything right. "I will have you," he said, "without mask, without treaty, with every door open that can be opened without breaking what should never be broken." The jurist lifted a hand that quieted even those who would have preferred to add wit to holy things. "Then speak as the church requires to enter betrothal," he said. "It binds you to the path. It does not hurry it." They spoke. Not the elaborate phrases of great alliances. The simple words that had always waited behind them. He promised to honor and guard and listen. She promised to speak and to hold and to walk beside without putting her feet in the only prince offered. The jurist nodded. The scribe wrote the words into record. Sand glittered over wet ink before it was lifted away. A murmur moved like wind through wheat. It was not outrage. It was not only relief. It sounded like a city learning that it had not been tricked into something ugly in daylight. A messenger entered, hat in hand. He looked as if he had rehearsed 10 openings and discarded 9. "From the convent," he said to the jurist. "The lady who was to be wed is safe and asks for time. No pursuit, no pressure." Leonore's fan closed more gently than it had moved all morning. It could have been defeat. It could have been a woman remembering what fear feels like in the absence of personnel and pretense. The older priest stepped forward and lifted a blessing that did not bind a union but bathed a new betrothal in mercy. He did not ask God to reward or punish. He asked that people be kept from the temptation to corrupt what had been told truly here. The jurist tapped the table. "It is done as much as can be done before a marriage," he said. "Now let those who need sunlight take it." The prince turned to Catalina, and together they walked out from under the roof that had nearly crushed them and into the courtyard of oranges. The morning had warmed into something like generosity. Leaves shivered. A fragrance rose, clean and high, as if the trees approved. They did not rush. The city needed a picture. It would have one. Not one of pageantry, of pace, of two people choosing step by step. He led her to a bench where the first slant of sun cut through leaves and laid a soft bar of light across the stone. Swallows, as if called by their own emblem, flicked overhead and stitched the air with quick arcs. He lifted a hand to her hair. He did not touch her cheek. He touched the silver swallow, adjusting it by a breath as if to claim not the thing but the privilege of making it sit well. His fingers brushed her, and the small contact went through both of them, as if the metal had been heated inside a forge and now carried that warmth into skin. "This is where it belongs," he said. She tipped her head slightly to meet his care. Not as disguise, she said. No, he answered, as declaration. He lowered his hand and looked at her as if looking, finally, were permission and not danger. The closeness held. It did not need to move faster. It did not need an audience. It had one. The city watched from behind lattices and pillars, and the invisible threads of gossip that carry news faster than men with horns. I dreamed as a boy of choosing the shape of my life, he said, a confession offered now because it could no longer be used to trip either of them. The shape I learned was duty. Today it looks like this. She smiled, and the expression made beauty into something active in her face. A bench and orange trees. And a woman who does not need my name to stand upright, he said. She lifted a hand, and with deliberation, set her palm on the back of his, where it lay resting on the bench. It was not a clasp. It was not even a full claim. It was pressure, heat, the kind of small touch people remember when their hair is gray, and they try to explain why they stayed. You will have it anyway, she said. Not because I need it, because I want what you carry when you speak it. He turned his hand and laced his fingers with hers. The jolt that went through him was not theatrical. It was relief finding its mark. It felt like walking into shade after hours in glare. In the open door behind them, the older priest watched with a face that had found rest. He lifted 2 fingers in blessing without words and vanished into the shadow that keeps holy things from being smothered by notice. The counselor stood farther back, counting already which men had placed themselves on the right side of history. He hid a smile, not triumph, satisfaction that a cleaner path had been taken and found walkable. Leonore paused at the edge of the courtyard and looked upon the scene she had tried to control and had failed to contain. For a heartbeat, her face softened into a shape she would never admit to in salons. Then her fan opened, her spine straightened, and she left to do what women like her always did. Tend damage, salvage pride, plan again. The city would not fall for truth told today. It would learn to include it. The bells began, not thunder, not panic, a measured peal that streaked the air with sound without bruising it. People in the street stood with their heads cocked like birds listening for weather. The sound said, "Something has been set right without blood." The sound said, "Witness this." He turned to her and did not ask. He let the fresh bond speak for him. He brought their joined hands to his heart and held them there, his pulse against her fingers, proof of the simplicity behind the titles. She leaned, the smallest movement, enough to share breath. "I am not afraid," she said. "Not of us. You were never afraid of me," he said. "Only of what stood behind me." "It is not standing there now," she said. "Because you stood here," he replied. She laughed once, a low sound shaped by disbelief and contentment sharing a seat. "Listen to you," she said, a prince trying to spread praise evenly like butter. He took the tease and kept it. "You will keep me from becoming insufferable." "I will try," she said, "and fail sometimes with pleasure." They sat in the widening light while swallows stitched loops above them, and orange fragrance wrote lines no scribe could capture. The ledger lay in the jurist's hands inside. The ink dried. The sand was blown away. People left benches with new words in their mouths to carry home. In the convent, a young woman knelt and found that quiet was, at last, quieter. He tilted his head. "Shall we tell the city together?" he asked. "Not today. Not as a show. As we walk. As we listen." "We will," she said. "We will teach it how to say my name." "Catalina," he said, and the way the syllables traveled from him to her and back again made the courtyard feel very small and very large at once. She looked at him one last time as if confirming something she already believed. Then she leaned and pressed her forehead lightly to his cheek, a kiss displaced by respect, a touch that promised the kind of intimacy that does not break when watched. The bells paused and the echo hung over the orange trees, tender and inevitable. He closed his eyes only long enough to memorize the feel of her hand in his, the weight of the hairpin in her hair, the sound of a city deciding to be kinder than it had intended to be. Then he looked out across the courtyard and saw their life, not as a map, but as a path that would be made by walking it together. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.